Serious. What story sounds like a horror story but actually happened?
Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
I was on a family vacation, hiking a trail in the mountains. A middle-aged woman was walking behind us, but keeping her distance. Eventually, she caught up to us and we made polite chit-chat like, "What brings you to the trail today?" As it turns out, last time she was there with a friend and they wandered off the trail. They ended up falling down a cliff and a helicopter came but couldn't get them out. Her friend died. I think she felt better that we were there, and it was nice that she could confide in us, but how awful. Gilles de Rais. He is quite famous for his bad deeds, even in America, I think, since I saw a direct reference to it in Archer, French hero and French monster at the same time. He was one of the closest friends to Joan of Arc, as he was a wealthy, skilled warrior, providing her most of her army, but he turned obsessed with Joan's purity and definitely turned crazy when she was executed. He fell into bad circles and turned obsessed with children's purity. He spent all of his fortune to kidnap children on a regular basis and kept only one of the many castles he had to do witchcraft and rituals on children involving torture and sexual abuse. He was then judged and executed for his crime, but since people at that time thought that we were pure souls trapped in a filthy body, and since he confessed his crime and asked for forgiveness, his execution was said to have gathered hundreds of prayers touched by his devotion and was very peaceful and solemn. You would have thought he would be yelled at or that people in the crowd would start to get violent, especially during the Middle Age. But no, unbelievable. Feel free to tell me if I made any English mistakes or if it's unclear. As you probably have guessed, I'm French. When I was a kid, we were on a road trip to Disney. Late one night, during the drive, my parents couldn't stay up anymore, so we went to a nearby hotel. Walk in, place reeks of cigarettes and cat pee, super mean employees. Tired, we push through and get to our room. Instant what the fuck. Bed has some strange liquid on it, TV screen broken with audio crackling, and there are cigarette butts on a windowsill. Odd noises from the other rooms, more in the people getting strangled to death way and less in the teens hooking up way. Parents asked if there were any other rooms, and they told us to take it or leave it, so we left it. They tried to make an excuse to get us to stay, but we just left and stayed at a Holiday Inn. Legitimately thought I was going to get murdered or kidnapped in that dump. The Toybox Killer. From Wikipedia. David Parker Ray, November 6, 1939, May 28, 2002, also known as the Toybox Killer, was an American kidnapper, torturer, rapist, and suspected serial killer. Though no bodies were found, he was accused by his accomplices of killing several women and suspected by the police to have murdered as many as 60 women from Arizona and New Mexico while living in Elephant Butte, approximately 7 miles north of Truth or Consequences. Ray soundproofed a truck trailer, which he called his toy box, and equipped it with items used for sexual torture. He would kidnap between 5 and 6 girls a year, holding each of them captive for around 3 to 4 months. During this period, he would sexually abuse his victims, sometimes involving his dog or his wife, who participated willingly in her husband's crimes, and often torture them with surgical instruments. Then Ray would either kill his victims or drug them with barbiturates in an attempt to erase their memories of what had happened before abandoning them by the side of the road. Ray was convicted of kidnapping and torture in 2001, for which he received a lengthy sentence, but he was never convicted of murder. He died of a heart attack about 1 year after his convictions in 2 cases, the second of which resulted in a plea deal. John George Haigh, a serial killer in 1940s England who killed rich people, forged their signatures for money, and dissolved their bodies in sulfuric acid. He was only caught when police found 8 pounds of body fat, part of a human pelvis, and some teeth in the corner of his land by his workshop. He misunderstood the phrase body of evidence and thought that if there is no body, then they simply cannot convict him. He tried to plead insanity by saying he had blood-filled dreams as a child and drank his victim's blood. However, they did not believe this, as he knew full well that he killed for money. He had 6 victims and claimed to kill 9. Some of these people he had known for years. His way of luring people in was charming them, then and befriending them. He had been in prison 3 times for fraud, and in his 3rd sentence, he learned about sulfuric acid dissolving mice, so he did it on humans, as I stated. He was sentenced to death and hanged in 1949. There's a 2002 movie called A is for Acid, starring Martin Clunes. I actually went to the George Hotel in Crawley, England, where he stayed, and have even been to Leopold Road in Crawley, where his workshop was. I'm 17, and I've avoided getting a job because I wanted to focus on school, and my dad told me that money made before you're 18 is useless, and spending more time on education will lead to a well-paying job in the future, so I listened. I eventually buckled and decided that I wanted to get a job to save money for college. My friend said that a new restaurant was looking for employees. I looked up the place, and it was in a really sketchy area. I told her that I was just going to keep on looking for somewhere closer. About a week later, she called me and told me that they were hosting a group interview, and this was my last chance to get the job. I was struggling to find other jobs, so I decided to just go, and any worries I was having about the area were just irrational. I got there, and the place was nice. There were about 15 other people there, and me and my friend sat with the girl who was really nice. This settled me, and I was much more open to the job than I was before. But things started to feel weird pretty quickly. There were two men who I assumed were co-managers. Despite there being 15 people in the room, the guy who was doing most of the talking was looking directly at me 90% of the time, to the point where I was nodding and responding as though we were in a one-on-one conversation. Every chance I got, I looked at my friend across the table with a concerned look on my face to see if she was noticing what I was. She was. It had been about 25 minutes of him just talking about the rules and regulations, so the other guy said that we'll have a 10-minute break and then return. After me and my friend had finished talking about how weird this guy was, we walked back. I noticed that this time there was another guy stood at the entrance to the kitchen, about 10 feet away from the rest of us. He was staring at me with his arms crossed. Something felt very off about the situation. About half an hour later, we were told we could leave. This place was in the center of town, and it was my other friend's birthday in a few days, and I wanted to stop and get her a card and a gift. My friend had a doctor's appointment, so she had to leave. It was just me. I got the card and gift and started walking in the direction of the bus station. There was a roadworks taking place, so I had to take a completely different route, which was about 15 minutes longer. I had my earphones in and was just walking. I heard gravel shifting and moving behind me, as though someone was rushing toward me. My neck felt stiff with fear, but I turned around, and it was the guy who was stood near the kitchen in the restaurant. Long story short, I kept walking, extremely anxious that this guy was following me. I turned the corner and I was grabbed from behind, pulled into an alley, tripped over, and cut all of my face. Thank God a group of men were passing and had seen this guy grab me. They ran toward us and grabbed the guy, pulling him away from me. The police were called, and after some questioning, they discovered that this restaurant was being run by people who were human trafficking on the side. The money they were making from the trafficking was being used for the restaurant, and the restaurant was a cover-up for their trafficking. Writing this makes me feel nauseous. I was lucky, many aren't. Human trafficking is a larger issue than you may assume. If those men wouldn't have seen, I would likely not be writing this today. Be aware at all times. I had experienced red flags leading up to the event, and I still was not vigilant enough. Red flags aren't always there. If walking alone, take routes that are visible to the public. Have a tracker on your phone that's connected to family and friends. Never leave the house without full battery. Carry weapons if that makes you feel safer. Let this be a lesson. The story of Robert Hansen, the butcher baker. He owned a small bakery shop in Alaska. He would kidnap women and take them to an island in Alaska and strip them naked and then let them go. He told them that they were free to go, but in reality, he was going to hunt them for sport. He would do this after raping them and torturing them for a while. He was caught because one girl got away before he could get her on his plane. Police found a map of the island with over 30 X on it. Each on was a victim. There was a man named Ariel Castro who kidnapped 3 women in the span of 2 years, ranging from 2002 to 2004. These 3 women would end up being there for a whole decade or close to a decade. They were trapped in the house just upstairs with locks, nothing too crazy. Regardless, it just has me in shock how 10 whole years go by, and yet no one found this man out. There should have been evidence right from the get-go that some kidnapper or serial killer was definitely on the loose, especially considering they were kidnapped in the same neighborhood, not the same city, same neighborhood. I mean, that right off the bat would have given off an alarm right there. You also got to consider how there had to have been one day where someone wanders upstairs for him or someone hears suspicious noises. I mean, come on, really? What makes this more sad is how he had a daughter of his own who was friends with all 3 women. I say women, but they were all teenagers except for one, but she was 21, so relatively young, but they were all friends with his daughter, and 2 of the women he lured, he used his daughter as leverage to get them in the truck. Another fact, there was a cop in 2008 who actually stopped Ariel Castro one day, something about his motorcycle or something along those lines. I don't remember the exact reason, but the cop could have easily arrested him right then and there. The reason why is because he just skipped a bunch of cars and also had his license plate hidden. The cop stops him and confronts him. Obviously, he's super nervous. Then Castro brings up how he's a school bus driver and that the license plate was just a mistake and he'll fix it, which the cop then let him go, as Castro works for the school system, which is awesome in his POV. If the cop had arrested Castro that day, then they would have most certainly caught on to something that really odd about him, or someone goes into his home, then boom, the women are saved. So when I was around 7 or 8, I loved doing ghost hunting. Now, to put into perspective, I was around 5'8" and weighed about 200 pounds, and we used to live by this creek that a few people had died. So anyways, one night I was able to sneak out to go into the field. My mom always told me to never go to the field alone, but my curiosity got the better of me, so I walked into the field, and the night breeze was very chilling, and it was dark enough where I had to use my dollar store flashlight. So I start walking until I hear a noise. It sounded like a chewing sound, but there were cracking sounds as well. So I aimed my flashlight toward the sound to see this skinny and bald person munching on what seemed to be some sort of dog or cat. Let's just say I ran home, locked the doors, and went to bed. I still haven't told my family this, but sometimes I still see that man eating, chewing, with loud cracks. 5'8" and 8 years old. A fetal kidnapping back in 2009. It's even mentioned on a Wikipedia page. A woman was found dead of loss of blood, and it was brutal. Police noticed the woman's stomach was sliced. It quickly dawned on them on what the motive was. The woman was pregnant, by the way. The police officers knew the father of the then newborn didn't do the deed, as he wasn't home at the time. It was proven by the police, who were the ones who told the guy. Luckily, someone informed the police about a strange couple days later. After a while, a couple was pulled over in New Hampshire. After getting word about the homicide and a BOLO for an infant, the couple was arrested and sent back to Massachusetts. Since Massachusetts doesn't have the death penalty, judges have ordered a psych exam because virtually nobody bothers with the insanity plea, as they're looking at life either way. The couple got life, and a father had to raise his daughter as a single dad. The incident made national news, even on Nancy Grace and the Associated Press. A few years back, I rented an old Victoria Terrace house for a couple of months. For multiple reasons I won't go into, it freaked me out. I don't believe in the supernatural, so I rationalized all of it, which somehow made it worse. Because the last thing to happen that triggered me to leave was when I was pulling out all the kitchen drawers to deep clean behind them. I found a DVD with my name written on it with black pen. No, I didn't watch it, and I don't think anyone else would have either when confronted with the reality of the situation. I can't think of any other explanation other than someone else had access to the house. When I was 6, my babysitter was abducted from the local park, which was directly across from an abandoned factory, sexually assaulted for several days before being killed and dismembered. He dumped half of her body in a nearby lake and half in garbage bags, which were then taken to the dump, which is where it was discovered she was dead, because birds of prey showed up to start feeding on her corpse. The other pieces of her body washed ashore eventually. It rocked my community for a long time. People are still hyper vigilant when they take their kids to that park, and it's been over a decade. So we have inherited a country home that is 2 floors high. It was the first time I was at the home, and we have separated it with an aunt's family. They own the upper part and we own the lower half. You may say, well, you got the worst half. You would be wrong. The lower half is always cool, while the upper half always hot, but the upper half has a huge balcony. So, anyhow, it was the first experience with 2-floored homes for me, so it was late at night, and when I was going from the balcony down the stairs to the lower half, when, with the corner of my eye, I saw something move. Now I have to let you know that I am very paranoid. I literally get scared just by seeing my shadow. Anyhow, so when I saw that, it was 1 minute to the door to the lower half, so I made a rush for it. But I saw something move with me. It turned out to be my younger cousin pulling a trick on me, knowing very well that I'm the type that hates in real-life horror experiences the most. Anyhow, that was it. So I'm only going to tell a certain part of this story, since this situation would take a long time to write out the details of the year-long nightmare both Lori, my best friend, and I went through. This took place when Lori and I were in early middle school about 15 years ago. Both Lori and I were being stalked. At the time, there were no iPhones, so Lori and I both had flip phones. Lori's phone got hacked, which hacking and cyberstalking weren't subjects that were publicly talked about, so imagine being 12 and not really knowing what's going on and thinking you're crazy. Lori's phone would have photos saved that she never took and would get text messages with no contact info from the sender. Apps would open and close when no one was touching the phone, and after turning the phone off, it would turn itself back on. After months of going through this creepy nightmare, Lori got to the point where she took the battery out of the back of her phone and would only use it when she needed to contact someone. Another side note, Lori and I both have complicated home lives, so we figured we would be seen as crazy or get in trouble. Plus, Lori lived with a single father and 2 brothers, so her family was barely financially stable, so she couldn't ask for a new phone. I'm going to explain one of the situations we faced in the year-long ordeal we went through. We were walking late one evening from Lori's house to my house, which was about 3 blocks away. The sun was setting, and around the time we reached the first block, we noticed a beaten-up white van that was slowly following us from behind. About halfway through the second block, the van was still following us slowly from behind. We started to get nervous when out of nowhere, Lori's phone chimed, indicating an incoming text. Lori, who forgot to take the battery out of her phone, slowly lifted her phone and opened the message, and after a few seconds, her eyes widened and she turned the phone towards me. A message with no contact info said, "Why won't you look at me? Don't ignore me. I can give you both a ride." Horrified, I tell Lori we should get away from the street and run behind the lines of houses through their backyards the rest of the way back to my house. After turning on the last block, we sprinted behind a row of houses, not even daring to look back at the van. Once we reached my house, we ran through the front door and I slammed the door closed quickly, locking it, and we sat there breathing heavily as we watched the street through the window for a couple of minutes. After waiting what felt like hours, we still saw no sign of the van and somewhat calmed down. We now at least had my older sister, who was the only one home at the time, nearby in case something happened. We went to my basement and started talking about the text and what we should do. At one point, I looked at the 2 windows, which had the blinds drawn up and were showing the light leaking out into the now completely dark surroundings. I remember feeling uncomfortable and paranoid, telling Lori that I was going to close the blinds, and as I closed the last blinds, Lori's phone, which we forgot again to take the battery out of the back of her phone, we stood there silent. Lori, hesitant at first, slowly opened her phone, and after a couple of seconds, I could see Lori start to shake, wide-eyed. She looked up to me in horror, and without saying a word, she turned her phone towards me. The short message said, "Why did you close the blinds?" Horrified, I called out to my sister. She came down, and we tried to explain to her what was going on, but she called us dramatic and didn't believe us. We were terrified. We genuinely believed he was standing just outside listening to us, and were convinced he was going to break in. Lori and I grabbed the largest, sharpest knives from the kitchen and stayed up all night, scared out of our minds, believing every little sound we heard were sounds of this guy trying to break in. Thankfully, nothing else happened that night, but that was hands down the longest, most horrifying night of my life.